Shut down engine 1 now or we all die. The voice came from seat 12F. Not from the cockpit. Not from a flight attendant. From a 23-year-old college girl with a medical textbook. The captain demanded, "Identify yourself immediately." She gave 2 words. Her military call sign. And in that instant, 189 terrified passengers fell completely silent. Because they realized this ordinary girl was their only hope. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The voice came from seat 12F. Not from the cockpit. Not from a flight attendant. From a 23-year-old college girl with a medical textbook. The captain demanded, "Identify yourself immediately." She gave 2 words. Her military call sign. And in that instant, 189 terrified passengers fell completely silent. Because they realized this ordinary girl was their only hope. Emma Rodriguez had looked like any other passenger boarding Flight 2847 in Chicago. Navy blue hoodie, worn backpack, tired eyes of a college student who hadn't slept well in days. She settled into seat 12F, window side, row 12, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the ground crew load luggage below. Nobody noticed her. Nobody paid attention to the quiet young woman clutching a cardiology textbook and a strange sense of unease she couldn't explain. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screensaver photo. A man in a military flight suit stood next to a fighter jet, his arm around a much younger version of Emma. Both were smiling, squinting against the bright desert sun. The man wore aviator sunglasses and had captain's bars on his shoulders. Captain Miguel Rodriguez. United States Air Force, fighter pilot, test pilot, and Emma's father. He had been gone for 3 years now, killed in a test flight accident over the Nevada desert. The official report said equipment malfunctioned during a high-altitude maneuver. Emma knew the truth was more complicated, but the result was the same. Her father was gone, and with him went the future he had planned for her. But not the training, never the training. From age 7 to 20, Emma's childhood had been different. While other kids played video games, she sat in cockpits learning about thrust ratios. While her friends went to parties, she studied engine schematics. Her father had taught her with an intensity that sometimes felt overwhelming, drilling procedures and sounds and emergency protocols into her mind until they became second nature. "Listen, Sparrow," he would say, using the nickname he had given her. "Aviation isn't just about knowing the rules. It's about understanding what the aircraft is telling you. Every sound, every vibration, every tiny change. The aircraft talks to you if you know how to listen." He had made her memorize emergency procedures before she learned to drive. He taught her to recognize engine problems by sound alone, to diagnose failures before instruments registered them, to stay calm when everything around her was falling apart. "Why do I need to know all this?" she had asked once, frustrated. "I want to be a doctor, not a pilot." Her father had looked at her with those serious dark eyes. "Knowledge is power, Sparrow. But more importantly, knowledge is responsibility. If you know something that could help people, you have an obligation to speak up. Even if you're scared, even if people don't believe you. Promise me that if you ever see something wrong, you'll have the courage to act." She had promised. How could she refuse her father anything? Now, 3 years after his death, Emma was finishing her pre-med studies and preparing for medical school. She had tried to put aviation behind her, to box up those memories with her father's flight manuals and the model airplanes they had built together. The memories were too painful, too tangled with grief. But old training never truly disappeared. The Boeing 737 MAX 8 sat at the gate, gleaming white with red and blue stripes. The boarding process completed with organized chaos, families settling children, business travelers claiming overhead space, flight attendants performing safety demonstrations that everyone ignored. Emma watched anyway. It was automatic. She noted emergency exit locations, counted rows to the nearest one, observed which passengers looked capable of helping in a crisis. Old habits died hard. The elderly couple beside her in 12D and 12E introduced themselves as Harold and Margaret Chen, married for 53 years, traveling to their granddaughter's wedding. "First time flying?" Margaret asked with a warm smile. "No, ma'am," Emma replied politely. "I've flown many times." "You look nervous, dear." Emma shook her head. "Not nervous. Just, paying attention." Something felt different about today, though she couldn't explain what. An instinct in her gut that her father had taught her never to ignore. "Your subconscious processes 1,000 details your conscious mind misses," he used to say. "If something feels wrong, trust that feeling." The engines spooled up with their characteristic high-pitched whine. The 737 MAX 8 used CFM LEAP 1B engines. Emma knew their specifications by heart, could draw their internal components from memory, understood their failure modes. "Stop it," she told herself. "Just be a normal passenger for once." The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Captain David Harrison's voice came through the speakers with professional calm. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Ladies and gentlemen, we're number 3 for takeoff. Should have you in the air shortly." They taxied to the runway, waited their turn behind 2 other aircraft, then accelerated down the concrete. Emma felt the nose lift, then the main gear, and they were airborne, climbing into the clear Chicago sky. The city spread below them, Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. The aircraft climbed smoothly through 10,000 feet, 15,000, 20,000. The seatbelt sign dinged off as they leveled at 38,000 feet. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign," announced flight attendant Jessica. "You're free to move about the cabin. Flight time to Los Angeles will be approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes. For 33 minutes, everything was perfect. Emma tried to read her medical textbook, but her mind kept wandering. She kept glancing at the wing, at the engine mounted beneath it. It looked fine. Sounded fine. Felt fine. Harold Chen dozed beside her. Margaret worked on a crossword. Around the cabin, passengers settled into comfortable monotony. Children played with tablets. Adults read or worked or slept. Then, at exactly 2:47 p.m. Central Time, Emma's blood turned to ice. It was so subtle nobody else noticed. A tiny change in the engine note, barely perceptible over ambient noise. But to Emma's trained ears, it was as loud as a gunshot. The pitch had dropped slightly. The vibration frequency had changed, becoming less smooth. Most people wouldn't notice it any more than they'd notice a single wrong note in a symphony. But Emma had been taught to hear these things. Her father's voice echoed in memory, "That's the sound of a fan blade developing a stress fracture. Rare in modern engines, but it happens. You have maybe 5 to 10 minutes before it fails completely. When it does, pieces of metal spinning at 10,000 RPM will tear through the engine like shrapnel. If you're unlucky, the fragments puncture fuel tanks or sever hydraulic lines or punch through the fuselage." Emma's hands gripped her armrests. She listened intently, filtering out all other sounds. There it was again, that irregularity, that wrongness. And it was getting worse. She looked around. Nobody else showed concern. Flight attendants continued their service. Passengers sipped drinks and read magazines. Harold snored softly. They had no idea. Emma pressed her call button. Nobody noticed the young woman in seat 12F. Her name was Emma Rodriguez, and at 23 years old, she looked like any other recent college graduate traveling home. She wore simple jeans, a navy blue hoodie from her university, and carried a worn backpack that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had the tired eyes of someone who hadn't slept well in days. But Emma Rodriguez was not ordinary. And in exactly 47 minutes, the words she would speak into the cabin intercom would reveal a secret that would save every single person on Flight 2847 from Los Angeles to Chicago. The Boeing 737 MAX 8 sat at the gate, gleaming white with red and blue stripes running along its fuselage. Captain David Harrison performed his pre-flight checks with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this exact routine over 15,000 times in his 28-year career. His first officer, Rachel Kim, sat beside her, equally focused on the instruments and procedures that would get 189 passengers safely to their destination. Everything about this flight seemed routine. Weather was clear. Aircraft maintenance logs showed no issues. The flight plan was standard. Los Angeles to Chicago, 3 hours and 42 minutes of unremarkable air travel. Emma settled into her window seat, 12F, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, ground crew loaded luggage with practiced efficiency. A fuel truck disconnected its hose and drove away. Everything moved like clockwork, a symphony of modern aviation that happened thousands of times every day across America. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screensaver photo. A man in a military flight suit stood next to a fighter jet, his arm around a much younger version of Emma. Both were smiling, squinting against the bright desert sun. The man wore aviator sunglasses and had captain's bars on his shoulders. Captain Miguel Rodriguez. United States Air Force, fighter pilot, test pilot, and Emma's father. He had been gone for 3 years now, killed in a test flight accident over the Nevada desert. The official report said equipment malfunctioned during a high-altitude maneuver. Emma knew the truth was more complicated, but the result was the same. Her father was gone, and with him went the future he had planned for her. Emma had grown up on military bases around the world. While other children played with dolls and video games, she sat in cockpits and learned about thrust ratios and flight dynamics. Her father had taken her everywhere, shown her everything, taught her with an intensity that sometimes felt overwhelming. From the time she was 7 years old, Emma's weekends had been different from other children. While her classmates went to soccer practice or dance recitals, Emma went to the hangar. Her father would lift her into the cockpit of whatever aircraft he was testing that month, settle her into the seat, and begin the lesson. "This is the throttle," he would say, guiding her small hand to the control. "Feel how it moves. Smooth, precise. In an aircraft, every movement matters. Too fast, and you stress the systems. Too slow, and you lose control. Aviation is about balance, Sparrow. Always about balance." He had started calling her Sparrow after she asked him why birds could fly and people couldn't. "Because birds understand something we had to learn," he had explained. "They know that flight isn't about fighting gravity. It's about working with the air, using the forces around you, becoming part of the sky instead of trying to conquer it. You're like a sparrow, my little one. Small, but made for the sky." The nickname had stuck. To her mother, she was Emma. To her friends, she was Em. But to her father, she was always Sparrow, always the child of the sky, always his little bird learning to fly. The training had intensified as she grew older. By the time she was 10, Emma could identify aircraft types by their engine sounds alone. At 12, she could recite emergency procedures for multiple aircraft models. At 14, she could read instrument panels and understand what every dial and gauge meant. "Listen, Sparrow," he would say, using the nickname he cherished. Aviation isn't just about knowing the rules. It's about understanding what the aircraft is telling you. Every sound, every vibration, every tiny change in how it feels. The aircraft talks to you if you know how to listen. Her father had been obsessive about teaching her to recognize abnormal sounds. He would play recordings of engine failures, hydraulic problems, electrical malfunctions. He made her close her eyes and identify what was wrong just by listening. At first, it had seemed like a game. Later, she realized it was training, preparation for scenarios he prayed she would never encounter but wanted her ready for nonetheless. He had made her memorize emergency procedures before she learned to drive a car. He drilled her on aircraft systems until she could recite them in her sleep. He taught her to recognize engine problems by sound alone, to diagnose failures before instruments registered them, to stay calm when everything around her was falling apart. One memory stood out particularly clearly. Emma had been 15, frustrated after spending her entire Saturday studying hydraulic system schematics while her friends went to the mall. She had finally snapped at him. "Why do I need to know all this?" she had demanded, throwing down the technical manual. "I'm not going to be a pilot. I want to be a doctor, remember? I want to help people, not fly airplanes. This is your dream, Dad, not mine." Her father had looked at her with those serious dark eyes that could shift from playful to intense in a heartbeat. He had been quiet for a long moment, and she had thought he might be angry. Instead, he had sat down beside her and taken her hands in his. "Emma," he had said, using her real name instead of Sparrow, which meant he was being very serious. "I know this seems excessive. I know your friends don't spend their weekends learning about compressor stalls and hydraulic failure modes. But I need you to understand something important." He had pulled her closer, his expression intense but loving. "Knowledge is power, Sparrow. But more importantly, knowledge is responsibility. If you know something that could help people, you have an obligation to speak up. Even if you're scared, even if people don't believe you, even if you're the only one who knows. The world is full of situations where someone knew something was wrong but didn't speak up because they thought nobody would listen. And people died because of that silence." Emma had looked down at their joined hands, her anger fading into confusion. "But Dad, what are the chances I'll ever need this? I'm going to be a doctor. I'll help people in hospitals, not in airplanes." Her father had smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that suggested he knew things he couldn't or wouldn't explain. "You're right. The chances are incredibly small. Maybe you'll never need any of this. Maybe all these hours of training will be completely wasted. But Sparrow, if there's even a 1% chance, even a fraction of a percent, that someday you'll be in a position where this knowledge could save lives, don't you want to have it?" He had squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not training you to be a pilot. I'm training you to be someone who can act when action is needed, who can speak up when silence would be easier, who has the knowledge and courage to make a difference when the moment comes. That's not about aviation. That's about being the kind of person who can help others when they need it most. Promise me something, Emma," he had continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Promise me that if you ever see something wrong, something dangerous, you'll have the courage to act. Promise me you won't let fear or doubt or what other people think stop you from doing what you know is right. Can you promise me that?" She had promised. How could she refuse her father anything? She hadn't understood then, sitting in that hangar with technical manuals spread around them, that he was preparing her for a specific kind of moment. A moment when she would be the only person who knew, the only person who could act, the only voice that could prevent disaster. Now, 3 years after his death, Emma was finishing her pre-med studies and preparing for medical school. She had put aviation behind her, boxed up those memories along with her father's flight manuals and the model airplanes they had built together. She flew commercially now and then, visiting her mother in Chicago, but she never paid attention to the sounds anymore, never analyzed the engine notes or thought about what was happening in the cockpit. She had tried to forget. The memories were too painful, too sharp, too tangled up with grief. Every aircraft sound reminded her of her father. Every flight brought back memories of sitting beside him, learning, listening, absorbing knowledge she had thought she would never need. Until today. The boarding process completed with the usual organized chaos. Families settled children into seats. Business travelers claimed overhead bin space. Flight attendants performed their safety demonstration to an audience that universally ignored it, more interested in phones and magazines than oxygen mask procedures. Emma watched anyway. It was automatic, ingrained by years of her father's training. She noted the emergency exit locations, counted the rows to the nearest one, observed which passengers looked physically capable of helping in an emergency. Old habits died hard. The elderly couple in 12D and 12E introduced themselves as Harold and Margaret Chen, married for 53 years, traveling to their granddaughter's wedding. They were kind and chatty, the sort of people who made conversation easy. "First time flying?" Margaret asked Emma with a grandmother's warm smile. "No, ma'am," Emma replied politely. "I've flown many times." "You look nervous, dear. Are you afraid of flying?" Emma shook her head. "Not afraid. Just, paying attention." It was true. Something felt different about today, though she couldn't articulate what. A feeling in her gut, an instinct that her father had taught her never to ignore. "Your subconscious processes 1,000 details your conscious mind misses," he used to say. "If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Investigate it. More often than not, your instincts are picking up on something real." But everything seemed normal. The flight attendants were professional and calm. The other passengers were relaxed. The aircraft looked well maintained. Emma told herself she was being paranoid, that her father's training had made her hypervigilant, that not every flight needed to be analyzed like a potential emergency. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. She found herself listening to the ambient sounds of the aircraft more carefully than usual. The hydraulic whine as flaps were positioned for takeoff. The pneumatic hiss of the air conditioning system. The subtle creaks and groans of the fuselage as passengers moved around the cabin. The engines spooled up with their characteristic high-pitched whine. The 737 MAX 8 used CFM LEAP 1B engines, newer and more fuel-efficient than previous generations. Emma knew their specifications by heart, could draw their internal components from memory, understood their failure modes and safety systems. Her father had made sure of that, drilling the information into her until it was as familiar as her own name. "Stop it," she told herself. "Just be a normal passenger for once." The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Captain Harrison's voice came through the speakers with that particular tone of professional boredom that all airline pilots seem to cultivate. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Ladies and gentlemen, we're number 3 for takeoff. Should have you in the air shortly." They taxied to runway 25 left, waiting behind a United Airlines jet and a Southwest 737. Emma watched the other aircraft take off, observing their rotation speeds, their climb angles, their engine performance. Again, all normal, all standard. All exactly as it should be. Then it was their turn. The engines roared to full takeoff power. Emma felt the acceleration press her back into her seat as they rolled down the runway, picking up speed rapidly. 70 knots, 80 knots, 100 knots. She felt the nose wheel lift off, then the main gear, and they were airborne, climbing into the clear Chicago sky. The city spread out below them, Lake Michigan stretching to the eastern horizon like an inland ocean. The aircraft climbed smoothly through 10,000 feet, 15,000, 20,000. The seatbelt sign dinged off as they leveled at 38,000 feet for cruise. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign," announced a cheerful flight attendant named Jessica. "You're free to move about the cabin. We'll begin our beverage service shortly. Flight time to Los Angeles will be approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes. For the first 33 minutes of the flight, everything was perfect. Emma tried to read a medical textbook about cardiology, but her mind kept wandering. She kept glancing out the window at the wing, at the engine mounted beneath it, at the thin contrail streaming behind them. The engine looked fine. Sounded fine. Felt fine through the aircraft's gentle vibration. She forced herself to focus on her textbook. She had an exam coming up next week, and she needed to understand cardiac arrhythmias better. But the words blurred together on the page. Her father's voice kept intruding into her thoughts, memories of lessons learned years ago. "The human body and an aircraft engine aren't so different, Sparrow," he had once said. "Both are complex systems where multiple components must work together perfectly. In the heart, electrical signals coordinate muscle contractions. In an engine, timing and fuel flow coordinate combustion. When something goes wrong in either system, the signs are there if you know how to read them. A doctor listens to a heartbeat for irregularities. A pilot listens to an engine for the same reason. Emma smiled sadly at the memory. Her father had always found ways to connect her medical interests with his aviation passion. He had supported her dream of becoming a doctor while simultaneously ensuring she had the aviation knowledge that he considered essential. Harold Chen dozed peacefully beside her, his wife Margaret working on a crossword puzzle. Around the cabin, passengers settled into the comfortable monotony of modern air travel. Children played quietly with tablets. Adults read or worked or slept. Flight attendants pushed their beverage cart down the aisle, dispensing drinks and snacks with practiced efficiency. A young mother 3 rows ahead struggled with a fussy toddler. A businessman across the aisle typed furiously on his laptop, racing to meet some deadline. A teenage girl listened to music, her head bobbing gently to a rhythm only she could hear. Normal people, living normal moments, completely unaware that their lives would soon depend on the knowledge possessed by the quiet young woman in seat 12F. Then, at exactly 2:47 p.m. Central Time, Emma's blood turned to ice. It was so subtle that nobody else noticed. A tiny change in the engine note, barely perceptible over the ambient cabin noise and passenger conversations. But to Emma's trained ear, it was as loud as a gunshot. The pitch had dropped slightly, maybe half a tone. The vibration frequency had changed, becoming just a fraction less smooth. Most people wouldn't notice it any more than they would notice a single wrong note in a symphony. But Emma had been taught to hear these things, trained to recognize them, drilled on what they meant. Her textbook forgotten, she sat perfectly still, every sense focused on that engine. She closed her eyes, filtering out visual distractions, concentrating entirely on the acoustic signature of the CFM LEAP 1B engine mounted on the left wing. There it was again. A slight roughness in the rotation, a harmonic that shouldn't exist. The engine was still running, still producing thrust, still within normal operational parameters by any standard measurement. But something was wrong. Something was developing, growing, heading toward failure. Her father's voice echoed in her memory with crystal clarity, "That's the sound of a fan blade developing a stress fracture. Rare in modern engines, but it happens. The blade is flexing abnormally, creating harmonic vibrations. You have maybe 5 to 10 minutes before it fails completely. When it does, it'll fragment. Pieces of metal spinning at 10,000 RPM will tear through the engine like shrapnel. If you're lucky, it just destroys the engine. If you're unlucky, the fragments puncture the fuel tanks or sever hydraulic lines or punch through the fuselage." Emma's hands gripped her armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. She listened intently, tracking the progression of the sound, analyzing its characteristics, comparing what she heard to the database of failure modes her father had drilled into her memory. Fan blade stress fracture, she thought. Progressive harmonic distortion, exponential degradation pattern. Time to failure, 5 to 8 minutes at current rate. She looked around the cabin. Nobody else showed any concern. The flight attendants continued their service, smiling and chatting with passengers. Jessica was laughing at something a passenger had said. Harold Chen continued snoring softly. Margaret worked on her crossword, completely oblivious. The young mother had finally gotten her toddler to sleep. The businessman kept typing. The teenage girl kept listening to her music. They had no idea. None of them could hear what she heard, know what she knew, understand the danger developing beneath the left wing. Emma's mind raced. What should she do? If she was wrong, she would create panic for nothing, would disrupt the flight, would embarrass herself in front of 189 people and a professional flight crew. They would think she was crazy, paranoid, one of those nervous passengers who jumped at every normal sound. But if she was right and said nothing, everyone would die. The blade would fail, the engine would explode, fragments would damage critical systems, and this aircraft would fall from the sky. The young mother and her toddler. Harold and Margaret Chen on their way to their granddaughter's wedding. The businessman racing his deadline, the teenage girl with her music, Jessica and the other flight attendants, Captain Harrison and First Officer Kim. All 189 souls aboard would perish. Her father's words came back to her, if you know something that could help people, you have an obligation to speak up. Even if you're scared, even if people don't believe you, even if you're the only one who knows. Emma pressed her call button with a trembling finger. Jessica, the flight attendant, arrived promptly with her professional smile. Yes, how can I help you? I need to speak to the captain, Emma said quietly, trying to keep her voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through her system. There's a problem with the left engine. Jessica's smile became slightly strained, the expression of someone who dealt with nervous passengers regularly. I'm sure everything is fine, but if you're concerned, I can. I need to speak to the captain now, Emma interrupted, her voice harder now, more insistent. The left engine has a failing fan blade. The vibration signature is wrong. He needs to know immediately. The flight attendant's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by the careful neutral expression of someone dealing with a potentially difficult passenger. Miss, I can assure you that our pilots monitor all aircraft systems continuously. If there were a problem, they would be aware of it. The instruments. They won't see it on their instruments yet, Emma said, her voice urgent but controlled. She was using the tone her father had taught her for emergency communications, clear, precise, unemotional. The sensors aren't sensitive enough to detect this in the early stages. The harmonic distortion is subtle right now, but it's accelerating. But I can hear it. I can feel it through the airframe. That fan blade is developing a fatigue crack, and when it fails, it's going to destroy the engine and possibly damage critical systems. Other passengers were starting to notice the conversation. A businessman across the aisle looked over curiously. Margaret Chen had stopped working on her crossword and was watching with concern. The teenage girl had removed one earbud and was listening. Jessica's training kicked in. She recognized the potential for panic spreading through the cabin if this continued. Miss, please lower your voice. You're going to frighten the other passengers. I promise I will inform the captain of your concerns, but I need you to remain calm and return to. I am calm, Emma said, though her heart was racing so fast she thought it might explode. I'm trying to prevent a catastrophe. Please, just let me speak to the captain for 30 seconds. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and sit quietly for the rest of the flight. But if I'm right and nobody listens, people are going to die. The word die sent a visible ripple through the nearby passengers. A woman 2 rows ahead clutched her husband's arm, her face suddenly pale. A mother pulled her child closer, her eyes wide with fear. The businessman's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Margaret Chen reached over and gripped her husband's hand, waking him from his nap. What's happening? Harold asked groggily. Is something wrong? Jessica made a quick decision. The last thing she needed was panic spreading through the cabin, and this young woman seemed determined to be heard. Better to address the concern directly than let it escalate. Stay here. Don't say anything else to the other passengers, Jessica said firmly. I'll speak to the captain. She hurried forward toward the cockpit, moving faster than the calm walk flight attendants usually maintained. Emma could see her speaking urgently into the intercom phone near the forward galley, glancing back at seat 12F multiple times during the conversation. In the cockpit, Captain David Harrison listened to Jessica's report with the patient tolerance of a pilot who had heard many passenger concerns over his long career. In 28 years of flying, he had dealt with countless nervous passengers who thought every normal sound was a catastrophic failure. People were afraid of flying. They heard the landing gear retract and thought the aircraft was falling apart. They felt routine turbulence and thought they were crashing. It was part of the job to be reassuring, to explain that everything was normal, to help people overcome their fears. She says she can hear a fan blade failure, he asked, skepticism clear in his voice. By sound alone, from the cabin, through all the ambient noise and insulation? Yes, sir. She's very insistent. She seems educated about it. She's using technical terminology. Fan blade stress fracture. Harmonic vibrations. She said your instruments won't show it yet because the sensors aren't sensitive enough in the early stages. Harrison exchanged a glance with his first officer. Rachel Kim had been his partner for 2 years, and they had developed the kind of wordless communication that came from hundreds of hours together in the cockpit. Her expression mirrored his skepticism. All our systems are showing normal operation, Rachel said, gesturing to the instrument panel. Engine 1 is running perfectly. N1 rotation speeds are correct at 94.2%. Exhaust gas temperatures are normal at 620 degrees Celsius. Vibration sensors are showing green across the board. Oil pressure is good. Fuel flow is nominal. Every parameter is exactly where it should be. Harrison nodded. Tell her we appreciate her concern, but all our systems are showing normal operation. Assure her that we monitor everything constantly and she's perfectly safe. Jessica returned to Emma with the captain's message, delivered in the soothing tone flight attendants use to calm nervous passengers. The captain says all systems are operating normally. The instruments show no problems with either engine. You're perfectly safe. Is there anything else I can get you? Some water maybe? It might help you relax. Emma had expected this response. She knew how it sounded. A random 23-year-old passenger claiming to diagnose engine problems by ear seemed absurd, seemed impossible, seemed like the paranoid delusion of someone afraid of flying or seeking attention. But the sound was getting worse. The harmonic distortion was increasing. She could hear it clearly now, a roughness in the engine note that was growing more pronounced with each passing second. The vibration was increasing too, transmitted through the airframe in ways that instruments might not yet register but that her body could feel. She estimated she had maybe 4 minutes left. Maybe 5 if they were lucky. The blade was in the final stages of failure, the stress fracture propagating through the metal, weakening with every rotation until it would suddenly let go and tear itself apart. Emma made a decision that would change everything. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Jessica moved to intercept her, but Emma sidestepped quickly, moving up the aisle toward the front of the cabin. Her voice rang out, clear and commanding, using the projection techniques her father had taught her for giving briefings to rooms full of military personnel. My name is Emma Rodriguez. I need everyone to listen to me very carefully and stay calm. The left engine on this aircraft is experiencing a fan blade failure. In approximately 4 to 5 minutes, that blade is going to separate completely. When it does, the fragments will likely damage other engine components, possibly causing a catastrophic failure and potential fire. We need the pilots to shut down that engine immediately. The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers gasped, some screamed. Children started crying, their parents pulling them close. People grabbed for their phones, their loved ones, their armrests, anything that provided a sense of security or control. Oh my God, we're going to crash, someone shouted. I knew I shouldn't have flown today, another voice cried out. Somebody do something. Jessica rushed toward Emma, joined by another flight attendant named Mark, a tall man in his 30s who looked capable of physically restraining her if necessary. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat immediately. You're creating a panic. This is completely unacceptable. I'm trying to prevent a disaster. Emma shouted back, her voice cutting through the chaos. I know what I'm talking about. That engine is going to fail catastrophically, and if we don't shut it down in the next few minutes, we're all going to die. Get me to that cockpit. Let me speak to the captain face to face. Margaret Chen stood up in her seat, her elderly voice surprisingly strong. Let her speak to the captain. What harm can it do? If she's wrong, we continue the flight. If she's right, she might save all of us. Several other passengers echoed the sentiment. The fear in the cabin was palpable now, but so was a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this young woman knew something important. In the cockpit, alarm bells of a different kind were ringing. Harrison had heard Emma's announcement through the open cockpit door. He was now faced with a serious situation, a passenger claiming imminent mechanical failure, causing panic in the cabin, potentially creating a security risk. Was this a hijacking attempt? A mental health crisis, a genuine concern from someone with knowledge? Lock the cockpit door, he ordered Rachel. Call for backup from the other attendants. We may need to restrain her and potentially divert to deal with a disruptive passenger. But Rachel was looking at her instruments with a growing frown. Captain, wait. I'm seeing something. Look at this. Engine 1, the left engine. The vibration levels are increasing. It's still in the normal range, but it's climbing. And look at this secondary display. She pointed to a screen showing detailed engine parameters. The N1 rotation speed is fluctuating. Just slightly, just a few tenths of a percent, but it's not steady. It should be rock solid at cruise power, but it's varying. And here, look at this. The exhaust gas temperature is starting to show minor oscillations too. Harrison leaned over to examine the data more carefully. Rachel was right. The variations were tiny, barely outside normal operational parameters, easily attributed to sensor noise or minor atmospheric effects. But they were there. And they were growing, becoming more pronounced with each passing second. Could be sensor error, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. His instincts were starting to tingle, the same instincts that had kept him alive through 28 years of flying, through thunderstorms and engine failures and hydraulic problems and all the other emergencies that pilots trained for but hoped never to encounter. Sir, Rachel said carefully, choosing her words precisely, what if she's right? What if there really is something wrong that our primary sensors aren't catching yet? The instruments are starting to show anomalies. They're subtle, but they're there. And they're increasing. Harrison had been a pilot long enough to know that sometimes the most unlikely sources provided the most critical information. He had once avoided a catastrophic landing gear failure because a ground crew member had noticed hydraulic fluid where it shouldn't be, a detail the cockpit instruments hadn't shown. He had aborted a takeoff because a passenger had reported a bird strike that he hadn't seen from the cockpit, preventing potential engine damage. Good pilots listened. Great pilots listened to everyone, even when it seemed crazy, even when the source seemed impossible. He thought about the woman's voice. She hadn't sounded hysterical. She hadn't sounded like someone seeking attention or trying to disrupt the flight. She had sounded professional. Knowledgeable. She had used correct terminology. Fan blade failure, stress fracture, harmonic vibrations. These weren't terms that random passengers knew. Open the door, he said suddenly. Let her come forward. But keep the attendants with her. If this is some kind of hijacking attempt or mental health crisis, I want people ready to intervene. And Rachel, keep watching those instruments. If the vibration levels increase any further, we shut down that engine immediately, regardless of what she says. The cockpit door opened. Emma was escorted forward by Jessica and Mark, both flight attendants maintaining careful positions on either side of her, ready to grab her if she made any threatening moves. The other passengers watched in stunned silence, some filming on their phones, others praying quietly, many simply frozen in fear and confusion. Emma stepped into the cockpit doorway and immediately her eyes went to the instruments. Even from her position, even upside down from her perspective, she could read the displays. Her father had made her practice reading instruments from every conceivable angle, explaining that in an emergency, you might need to help a pilot who was incapacitated, might need to understand what was happening from any position in the cockpit. Engine 1 vibration climbing. N1 fluctuation visible. Exhaust gas temperature starting to vary. Oil pressure beginning to show minor oscillations. The instruments were starting to confirm what her ears had heard minutes earlier. "Captain," she said, her voice steady and professional now, channeling every lesson her father had ever taught her about communication in emergencies. "My name is Emma Rodriguez. I'm not crazy, I'm not a terrorist, and I'm not having a mental breakdown. My father was Captain Miguel Rodriguez, United States Air Force. He was a fighter pilot and test pilot for 17 years before he died 3 years ago in a training accident. Before he died, he taught me everything he knew about aircraft systems and emergency procedures. He trained me to recognize engine failures by sound, to diagnose problems before instruments registered them, to stay calm and act decisively in crisis situations." She took a breath, her eyes moving between Harrison and Rachel. "I have been listening to that left engine since takeoff. For the first 33 minutes of this flight, it sounded perfect. Then, at approximately 2:47 p.m., the acoustic signature changed. The pitch dropped slightly. The harmonic frequency shifted. I recognized it immediately as a fan blade developing a stress fracture. I estimate you have approximately 3 minutes, maybe 4 at most, before that blade fails catastrophically." Harrison studied her face carefully. He saw no madness there, no hysteria, no deception. He saw focus, determination, knowledge, and most importantly, he saw absolute certainty. This young woman believed completely in what she was saying. And she was reading his instruments from across the cockpit, understanding what they meant, interpreting the data correctly. "How can you hear something our sensors aren't fully detecting yet?" he asked, his skepticism warring with growing concern. Emma met his eyes directly. "Because I was trained to listen to engines the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. The harmonic frequency of a failing blade is different from normal operation. It creates pressure waves that interact with the other blades in the fan assembly. The sound signature is distinctive if you know what to listen for. Your sensors measure specific parameters like rotation speed and temperature and vibration amplitude. They're looking for gross changes, for obvious failures. But my ears are hearing the overall acoustic profile, the subtle shifts in harmonic resonance that indicate internal stress before it becomes catastrophic." She pointed to the vibration display without touching anything. "Your instruments are starting to show it now. Vibration increasing that N1 fluctuation, temperature oscillation. But by the time these parameters reach levels that your warning systems recognize as dangerous, it will be too late. The blade will have already failed." Rachel pointed to her screen with growing alarm. "Captain, she's right. Look at this. Vibration is now officially outside normal range. It's subtle, but it's there. It's at 2.8 units when it should be below 2.0. And it's accelerating. In the last 60 seconds, it's increased by 0.3 units." Harrison felt his pulse quicken. Vibration levels didn't increase like that during normal operation. Something was wrong. Something was developing. And this young woman had detected it minutes before his instruments had. He made his decision with the decisiveness that defined exceptional pilots. "Miss Rodriguez, what do you recommend?" Emma took a breath, feeling the weight of 189 lives resting on her next words. This was the moment her father had prepared her for. This was why he had spent thousands of hours teaching her, drilling her, making her practice scenarios until she could execute them in her sleep. "Shut down engine 1 immediately," she said clearly. "Don't wait for the failure. Don't wait for your warning systems to alarm. Initiate a controlled shutdown right now while you still have time to do it safely. Once that blade lets go, you lose control of the shutdown sequence. The engine could seize. It could catch fire. It could fragment in ways that damage the wing structure, sever hydraulic lines, puncture fuel tanks, or compromise the fuselage." Harrison's mind raced through the implications. They were over the Rocky Mountains at 38,000 feet. If they shut down an engine, they would need to descend immediately. They would need to divert to the nearest suitable airport. Single-engine operation at high altitude over mountains was not ideal, but it was infinitely preferable to an uncontained engine failure. "We're at FL 380 over the Rockies," he said, testing her knowledge. If we shut down an engine, where do we go? Emma didn't hesitate. The information came automatically, pulled from the database of knowledge her father had built in her mind. Denver International is your best option, 43 miles south-southwest of your current position. Runway 16R is 12,000 feet long, plenty of length for a single-engine landing in a 737. Current winds from your ATIS should be light, probably less than 10 knots. You can make a straight-in approach, minimal maneuvering required. Alternatively, Colorado Springs is 58 miles south, but Denver is closer and has better emergency equipment. Harrison and Rachel exchanged shocked glances. This young woman had just provided precise navigation information, runway data, and tactical decision-making, all within seconds, all completely accurate. "Rachel, your call," Harrison said. "You've got equal authority here. Do we listen to her?" Rachel Kim stared at her instruments. The vibration was now at 3.1 units and climbing. The N1 fluctuation was becoming more pronounced. The temperature oscillations were increasing in amplitude. Every parameter was telling the same story: something was wrong and it was getting worse. She thought about her training, about all the procedures and checklists and standard operating practices. But she also thought about Air France 447, about Alaska Airlines 261, about all the accidents where crews had followed procedures right up until the moment they crashed because the procedures didn't account for the specific failure mode they were experiencing. Sometimes the right decision came from outside the manual. "She's reading our instruments correctly from across the cockpit," Rachel said. "She knows what she's talking about. She detected this problem before our sensors did. And our instruments are now confirming an increasing problem. I say we shut it down. I say we listen to her." "Agreed." Harrison's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency. "Engine 1 shutdown checklist. Execute immediately. Miss Rodriguez, sit in the jump seat behind me. Strap in. If you're right about this, we're going to need you." Jessica gently guided Emma to the observer seat behind the captain's position, helping her fasten the 4-point harness. "Don't move," the flight attendant whispered. "Don't speak unless they ask you something. And please, God, let you be right about this." Emma nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the cockpit must be able to hear it. Through the windscreen, she could see the left engine, could see it running, could hear the wrongness in its sound even more clearly now without the cabin door muffling the noise. Harrison spoke into the radio with the professional calm that pilots maintained even during emergencies. "Denver Center, this is Flight 2847. We are declaring an emergency. We are shutting down our number 1 engine due to suspected mechanical failure. Requesting immediate vectors for Denver International, runway 16R." There was a brief pause, then the controller's voice came back, equally professional. "Flight 2847, Denver Center copies your emergency. Squawk 7700. Turn right heading 180. Descend and maintain flight level 280. All traffic is being cleared from your path. Emergency equipment will be standing by. Do you require any additional assistance?" "Negative at this time," Harrison replied. "We will be operating single engine, but the aircraft is controllable. We anticipate normal landing configuration." Rachel worked through the engine shutdown procedure with practiced precision, her fingers moving across switches and levers, her eyes scanning instruments, her voice calling out each step. "Fuel cutoff valve number 1, closed. Hydraulic pump number 1, off. Generator number 1, disconnected. Engine fire handle, ready to pull if needed. Engine 1 is shutting down. Monitoring for any fire indication or abnormal parameters." The left engine began its shutdown sequence, the high-pitched whine decreasing in frequency as the turbine spooled down. Emma listened intently, analyzing every sound, comparing what she heard to the mental database of normal and abnormal shutdown characteristics her father had installed in her mind. "Rotation decreasing normally," Rachel reported. N1 down to 70%, 50%, 30%, vibration decreasing. No fire indication. Temperature dropping normally. Oil pressure decreasing as expected. The engine continued winding down. 60 seconds after Harrison had initiated the shutdown, the big fan in the nose of the engine coasted to a complete stop, the blades motionless, frozen in place. Engine 1 is shut down completely, Rachel announced. Vibration at 0. Temperature dropping to ambient. No fire, no smoke, no abnormal indications. Clean shutdown achieved. The aircraft's behavior changed subtly. With only the right engine producing thrust, there was a yaw tendency to the left that Harrison compensated for with rudder trim. The overall noise level decreased slightly. The vibration pattern changed, becoming slightly smoother now that the failing engine was no longer contributing its abnormal harmonics to the airframe. Harrison adjusted his controls, getting used to the single-engine handling characteristics. "How much time did we have?" he asked Emma, his voice tight. Emma was still listening, still analyzing, using the sounds the engine had made during shutdown to refine her estimate. "Based on the degradation rate I was hearing and the temperature spike Rachel mentioned during shutdown, I estimate you had maybe 90 seconds, possibly 2 minutes at most before catastrophic failure. The blade was in the final propagation stage. The stress fracture had probably extended through 70 to 80% of the blade cross-section. One more high-power cycle, maybe one more minor turbulence event, and it would have let go." Rachel pulled up diagnostic data on her screen, her face going pale. "Captain, look at this. Engine 1 recorded a temperature spike during the last 30 seconds before shutdown. Exhaust gas temp jumped 60 degrees in 20 seconds. That's completely abnormal. That's exactly what you'd see if a blade was flexing badly, disrupting the airflow, causing localized hot spots in the combustion chamber." She looked over her shoulder at Emma, her expression mixing awe with fear. "You were right. Completely right. We were minutes away from an uncontained failure." Harrison felt cold sweat on his neck. In 28 years of flying, he had never experienced an actual catastrophic engine failure. He had trained for it hundreds of times in simulators, but the real thing had never happened. Until today. Except it hadn't happened, because a 23-year-old passenger had heard what his instruments couldn't yet measure and had the courage to speak up when it would have been easier to stay silent. "Miss Rodriguez," he said quietly, "I think you just saved this aircraft and everyone on it." Emma shook her head, tears suddenly blurring her vision. "My father saved them, sir. I'm just the tool he created. He spent years teaching me exactly what to listen for, exactly what to do, exactly how to stay calm when everything feels like it's falling apart. He used to say that knowledge is power, but it's also responsibility. Today I finally understood what he meant." The descent to Denver was smooth and professional. Harrison and Rachel worked together flawlessly, managing the single-engine approach with the competence that came from thousands of hours of training and experience. They coordinated with air traffic control, briefed the flight attendants on landing procedures, and prepared the aircraft for an emergency landing that turned out to be as routine as any normal approach. Emma stayed silent in the jump seat, her job done, her intervention complete. She watched the pilots work, seeing in their movements and communication the same professional excellence her father had embodied. She felt connected to him in this moment, felt his presence in this cockpit, felt like he was working through her to protect these people. Behind them in the cabin, the passengers had calmed somewhat. Jessica and Mark and the other flight attendants had made announcements explaining that they were diverting to Denver as a precaution, that everything was under control, that there was no immediate danger. But Emma could imagine the fear that still permeated the aircraft, could picture the mothers holding their children tight, the couples gripping each other's hands, the prayers being whispered by people who normally never prayed. Margaret Chen appeared at the cockpit door, allowed forward by Jessica for just a moment. "Is she okay?" the elderly woman asked, her voice full of genuine concern as she looked at Emma strapped into the jump seat. "She's fine," Jessica said. "She's actually Mrs. Chen, she's the reason we're all going to be fine." Everything she said was true. Margaret looked at Emma with tears in her eyes. Your father must have been an extraordinary man to teach you all of this. Emma couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just nodded, feeling the tears streaming down her cheeks, making no effort to wipe them away. He was everything, she finally managed to whisper. He was everything good in the world. And today he reached across death itself to save all these people. Through me. He saved them through me. Denver International Airport appeared on the horizon, its distinctive white tent-like terminal roof visible from miles away. The city spread out below them, and Emma could see emergency vehicles already positioning along the runway, fire trucks and ambulances ready for any possibility. The airport had cleared all other traffic, giving Flight 2847 absolute priority. Harrison made a perfect approach, the aircraft stable and controlled despite operating on a single engine. His hands moved with the precision that came from thousands of repetitions, his eyes scanning instruments, his voice calm as he coordinated with Rachel. 500 feet, Rachel called out. Airspeed on target. Sync rate good. Runway made. Landing assured. 400 feet. 300 feet. 200 feet. The runway rose to meet them, concrete and markings and salvation. Emma held her breath, her hands gripping the armrests of the jump seat. 100 feet. 50 feet. The wheels touched down with barely a bump, a perfect landing that any pilot would be proud of. Harrison deployed thrust reversers on the remaining good engine, applied brakes smoothly and evenly. They rolled down the runway, decelerating steadily, the emergency vehicles pacing them, ready to respond to any problem. But there was no smoke, no fire, no visible damage. Just a commercial aircraft landing safely on a sunny afternoon in Denver. They came to a complete stop on the taxiway. Emergency vehicles surrounded them immediately, firefighters in full gear swarming around the aircraft, checking for any signs of fire or fuel leakage or structural damage. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison said into the cabin PA, his voice reflecting the exhaustion and relief he felt, welcome to Denver International Airport. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank the passenger who identified the engine problem and gave us time to shut it down safely before it became catastrophic. We are safely on the ground because of her knowledge, her courage, and her willingness to speak up when it mattered most. Flight attendants, you may begin normal deplaning procedures. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers cheered, cried, hugged each other and the flight attendants. The relief was palpable, a collective release of tension that had been building since Emma's dramatic announcement 47 minutes earlier. People unbuckled and stood, but many turned to look toward the cockpit, trying to catch a glimpse of the woman who had saved them. They wanted to thank her, to understand how this had happened, to process the miracle of their survival. Emma remained in the jump seat, suddenly too exhausted to move. The adrenaline that had kept her going through the crisis drained away all at once, leaving her shaking and weak, overwhelmed by emotion. Jessica appeared beside her, helping her unbuckle the harness. Come on, the flight attendant said gently. Let's get you off the aircraft before the investigators arrive. You're going to need to give a statement, but first you need some water and maybe something to eat. You look like you're about to collapse. As passengers deplaned, using the jet bridge that had been connected to the aircraft, many of them stopped to look at Emma, to try to speak to her, to express their gratitude. She accepted their thanks with grace but said little. She was running on empty, held together only by the remnants of the training that had taught her to stay functional during crises. A young mother stopped in front of her, holding the hand of a little girl about 6 years old. Thank you, the mother said simply, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for saving my daughter. Thank you for giving her a future. I don't know who you are or how you knew, but thank you. The little girl looked up at Emma with wide, serious eyes. Are you an angel? She asked innocently. Emma knelt down to the child's level, managed a small smile through her own tears. No, sweetie. I'm just someone whose daddy taught her to pay attention and speak up when something is wrong. Remember that, okay? If you ever know something important, don't be afraid to tell people, even if you think they won't listen. The NTSB investigators arrived within 2 hours, 3 serious individuals in dark suits who set up in an airport conference room and began the process of documenting everything. They interviewed Captain Harrison first, then Rachel Kim, then the flight attendants, then selected passengers. Finally, they called Emma. Lead investigator Thomas Chen, no relation to Harold and Margaret, sat across from her with a digital recorder and a thick notepad. His expression was professionally neutral, giving nothing away. "Miss Rodriguez," he began, "I need you to walk me through exactly what you heard, when you heard it, and how you knew what it meant. Start from the beginning. Don't leave out any details." Emma took a breath and began her account. She explained her father's background, her training, the specific acoustic signatures she had detected. She drew diagrams of engine internals from memory, explaining the physics of harmonic blade failure with the precision of an engineer. She described the sound characteristics, the vibration patterns, the progression of the failure mode. The investigators listened in growing amazement. This wasn't a lucky guess. This wasn't paranoia that happened to be right. This was genuine expertise, specialized knowledge applied perfectly in a crisis situation. "How long did you train?" Investigator Chen asked. "From age 7 to age 20, Emma replied. 13 years. Thousands of hours. My father made me study engine sounds the way some parents make their kids practice piano. He would play recordings of different failure modes and make me identify them. He drilled emergency procedures into me until I could recite them in my sleep. He wanted me to be ready for something like this, I guess. He said knowledge was responsibility. And you recognized this specific failure type?" "Yes, sir. Fan blade stress fracture with progressive harmonic degradation. It's relatively rare in modern engines because manufacturing quality control is so good, but it does happen. Usually it's caused by a microscopic defect in the metal that isn't caught during inspection. The blade operates normally for thousands of hours, but each cycle puts stress on that defect, and eventually it begins to crack. The crack propagates slowly at first, then accelerates exponentially in the final stage." Investigator Chen made notes. "We're going to examine that engine tomorrow. If your assessment is correct, this could have significant safety implications. We'll need to stay in touch with you as the investigation continues." 3 days later, Emma received a call from Investigator Chen. "We disassembled the engine," he said without preamble. "Fan blade number 7. You were exactly right, Miss Rodriguez. Stress fracture originating from a microscopic manufacturing inclusion. The fracture had propagated through approximately 78% of the blade cross-section. Metallurgical analysis indicates it was within 90 to 120 seconds of complete catastrophic failure when you convinced the crew to shut down the engine." He paused, and Emma could hear papers rustling in the background. "If that blade had failed at cruise altitude, the fragments would have destroyed the engine casing, severed 2 hydraulic lines, and punctured the fuel tank. The resulting fire would have been uncontrollable. The aircraft would have been unrecoverable. Everyone aboard would have died." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words. 189 people. All alive because she had listened to her father's training, because she had recognized a sound nobody else could hear, because she had the courage to speak up despite the fear and doubt. "Thank you for calling to tell me," she said quietly. "Miss Rodriguez, this is going to become a significant case in aviation safety. Boeing is issuing a service bulletin. The FAA is mandating enhanced inspection protocols for these engines. Airlines around the world are going to start ultrasonic testing of fan blades that have accumulated certain operating hours. We've already discovered 3 more blades with similar stress fractures in the fleet. You didn't just save Flight 2847. You've potentially prevented multiple future disasters." After the call ended, Emma sat in her apartment, staring at the photo of her father on her desk. She thought about all those hours of training, all those weekends spent studying engine schematics while her friends were at parties, all those drills and procedures that had seemed excessive at the time. None of it had been wasted. Every single hour had mattered. Her father had known something she hadn't, that preparation for unlikely events was what separated survival from disaster. That specialized knowledge, even knowledge you never expected to need, could become the difference between life and death. 2 weeks later, Captain David Harrison called her. "Emma," he said, they were on a first-name basis now, "I wanted you to know that Rachel and I have been thinking about that day constantly. We've been flying for a combined 40 years, and we've never experienced anything like that. The airline is recommending us for special recognition for how we handled the emergency, but Rachel and I both know the truth. We didn't save that flight. You did. We just followed your instructions." "I couldn't have done it without you listening to me," Emma replied. "Most pilots would have dismissed me. Most pilots would have made a terrible mistake," Harrison said. "I've been thinking a lot about that. About how close we came to ignoring you. About how easy it would have been to write you off as a nervous passenger. If I had done that, if we had waited even 3 more minutes." His voice trailed off, the implications too terrible to speak aloud. "Your father taught you more than technical knowledge, Emma. He taught you courage. He taught you to trust yourself even when everyone else doubts you. That's a rare gift. I hope you know how special you are. I hope you know that what you did required not just knowledge, but extraordinary bravery." After they hung up, Emma pulled out a box she kept in her closet. Inside were her father's old aviation manuals, his flight logs, his photos, his medals. She found the notebook where he had written lesson plans for her training, pages and pages of his handwriting detailing what he wanted to teach her and why. On the last page, written in his distinctive script, was a note she had never seen before. "To my dearest Sparrow. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But I want you to know why I spent so much time teaching you about aviation, even though I knew you wanted to be a doctor and not a pilot. I taught you because knowledge is love. Every lesson was my way of protecting you, of giving you tools you might need someday, of preparing you for a world that can be dangerous and unpredictable. I taught you to listen carefully, to trust your instincts, to speak up when you know something is wrong. These skills will serve you well in medicine, but they'll also serve you well in life. If you ever use this knowledge to help people, know that I'm proud of you. Know that everything I taught you was worth it. Know that my love for you transcends time and space and even death itself. You are my greatest achievement, my little sparrow. Fly high, fly true, and never be afraid to soar. Love always, Dad." Emma read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. He had known. Somehow, he had known that she would need this knowledge, that there would come a day when everything he taught her would matter. The airlines invited her to speak at their annual safety conference. She stood before hundreds of aviation professionals and told her story, holding up the photo of her father in his flight suit. "Captain Miguel Rodriguez taught his daughter well," she concluded. "He taught me about engines and emergencies, about courage and responsibility, about speaking up even when you're afraid. He's been gone for 3 years, but on that day over the Rocky Mountains, he saved 189 people. He just did it through me, through the knowledge he gave me, through the legacy he left behind." She held up the photo higher. Knowledge is love. Remember that. When you teach someone, when you share your expertise, when you prepare someone for scenarios they might never face, you're giving them a gift that could save lives. My father gave me that gift. And because he did, 189 people went home to their families. The applause was thunderous. Later, Frank Martinez, the retired Air Force pilot who had known her father, approached her with something in his hand, her father's pilot wings. "You earned these," he said simply. "You're as much a pilot as any of us." Emma pinned the wings to her jacket, feeling the weight of them, feeling her father's presence stronger than ever. That night, she wrote one final letter. "Dear Dad. I kept my promise. I used everything you taught me. I spoke up when it mattered. I saved them. But more than that, I finally understand why you pushed me so hard. You weren't preparing me to be a pilot. You were preparing me to be someone who could make a difference when the moment came. 189 people are alive because you loved me enough to teach me. Because you believed knowledge was responsibility. Because you prepared me for the impossible. Thank you, Dad. For everything. I'll carry your legacy forward. I'll keep learning, keep being ready, keep honoring the gift you gave me. Your Sparrow, forever. Emma. She placed the letter with his medals and smiled through her tears. Her father was gone, but his love remained, proven in the most dramatic way possible, in 189 lives saved by a daughter who listened when he taught her and had the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is responsibility. But most of all, knowledge is love. And that love, passed from father to daughter, had defied death itself to protect strangers, proving that the greatest legacy anyone can leave is a child prepared for anything. Call sign Sparrow, forever vigilant, forever ready, forever honoring the father who made her who she was. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more incredible true stories. Comment below, what lessons did your parents teach you that you carry with you today?